21. Aaron. It had been about an hour since my uncle left the Packlands with Dylan and I was still sitting here in the woods behind her house. Everything that had happened last night had me on edge. Unable to stay in and get a bit of sleep, I went over to the guard stations and volunteered for the night patrols so that I at least had an excuse to be near her. Since the night I caught him at her house again, I've been on edge. I had wanted to approach him or at least try to find out a way to get information from him about what he was up to now, but I knew better than to come out and question him. The constant battle to push my limits with him was waging war inside of me, but thankfully Noel happened to find me pacing outside of his office before I ended up getting myself in all kinds of trouble. Oi, Aaron. Why don't ya come help me with something? Noel didn't stop walking when he called to me because I knew he was positive that I would follow him. The office was on the second floor of the pack house, so when we hit the stairs I went up beside him, but didn't ask anything while we were still in the building. Of anyone in this place, Noel probably knew better than most that there were eyes and ears everywhere. I kept pace with him and waited until I had followed him out to one of the new training yards. As soon as we stepped into the equipment room, he smacked me on the back of my head. Are ya looking for a beatin' boy? What are you talking about, Noel? I bit out as I stood there rubbing the back of my head. He didn't hit me that hard, but I was in no mood to deal with his bullshit right now. Noel was grabbing some sparring mats and I knew what he was intending for us to do. If you would have gone in there with that look on your face, I would have ended up bandaging your bloody body later tonight. Annoyed that not only was he right, but that I was still stuck here with no answers. I figured I would see what Noel might tell me. I know, I said as I walked over and helped grab some of the mats. Did you bring me here to knock some sense into me, or knock the crap out of me? Noel laughed, and I knew that it was probably a little bit of both at that moment. Regardless, I appreciated the fact that he gave a damn about me at all. After we set up the sparring mats, we went a few rounds of just basic hand-to-hand drills, but it eventually evolved to full combat training. Noel had been one of the trainers for years before he became one of my uncle's personal guards. Unsure if he thought I needed it, or if this was the only way he knew to help me, it worked. Once he had thoroughly kicked my up and down the mats, he let me lay there trying to catch my breath. How is that, you're hardly even-winded, old man? He turned his head to look at me so quick, it took everything I had left not to die from laughing because it hurt too damn much. Oi, who are you calling old man when I just wiped the floor with you, literally? I had nothing to say to that because it was true, but there's no way I would admit it out loud. Eventually, he walked over to me and extended his arm to help me up off the floor. Get up, lad. You feelin' better yet? Though my body hurt like hell, my mind seemed more at peace than it had been in some time. So that's why you beat the hell out of me, to make me feel better. I better not visit you when I'm sick, you'll end up killing me for real. Noel couldn't hold in his laughter this time, and neither could I. You may be right, lad. When we were almost done cleaning up the training area, I found myself back in that closet with him again, but I wasn't expecting him to tell me what he did then. Your uncle is taking Dylan off the Packlands tomorrow for a meeting that her employer has requested. He will be having a meeting there as well. The news shocked me and I dropped the last mat that was in my hands. Why are they wanting to see her? Who is he meeting with? Who all is going? Enough with the questions, boy. That's all I can tell ya. He reached to grab the fallen mat and once it was in its place, he walked in front of me and placed both his hands on my shoulders. We stood so close to each other that it was easy to see how much taller I was to him, but with the way he carried himself you would think he was a giant. Don't get yourself in trouble, lad. He gave a slight squeeze and then softly smacked me again on the back of the head before he headed for the door. I stayed there for a few moments longer to try to get my thoughts in order, but I knew that I had to get out of here. All I wanted to do was go see Dylan or my uncle and demand answers, but I knew neither of them would want to see me. When I left the training area I realized that it was much later than I had thought it was. I knew that I should go back to the pack house for food, but I couldn't bring myself to see my uncle right now. I stopped at one of the local shops and ate a couple slices of pizza. As I ate I tried to come up with ways that I could join the little excursion that they were going on tomorrow. Dane had just started talking to me a bit more, but he had no helpful options to offer either, so he just stayed quiet and grumpy. When I had no other options but to go home, I decided to take a little extra time and walk there instead of shifting and getting there too soon. As I was walking along the main street of the market area, my phone went off. I thought it was my aunt checking in on me, but I was surprised to see that it was Cruz. Cruz was a little younger than me, but him and I had become really good friends while working with the guard and patrols. Quickly opening up his message, I immediately stopped moving. F***ck. I wasn't even sure if I was still breathing. I'm with my sister at her friend's house and I picked up a strange scent here. You might want to check it out. Even though Lesia was my age, we weren't friends. I would have to say we were just acquaintances. And what little I did know about her, the only friend that she had right now was Dylan. I didn't even bother to respond back to him on the phone. I threw my phone in my little bag and immediately shifted. Dane was running at full speed the moment his paws hit the ground. We were in an all-out sprint to get to Dylan's house as quickly as possible, and as soon as we were about a mile from it he began to search for any unfamiliar scents. Since we had already come into contact with the intruder's scent, that is the one that he began to search for. He stayed in the woods near her house and cursed me for not thinking earlier. You should have taken a moment to think about your clothes, Aaron. He growled at me. Damn it, he was right, but I was in no mood to let him know that, so I just kept my thoughts quiet. Dane made circles around the entire area and not just Dylan's house. No one would think twice about a wolf running through the area since we have stepped up the amount of the patrols. Finally he dared to get closer to Dylan's house and come up around the back. The moment we were a few feet from her back door there was a hint of that scent. Dane froze in place and I could feel his anger boiling over. We had both become so protective of Dylan lately, but I was glad for it. It meant that we were in agreement and that we would both do whatever we had to do to help her in whatever ways that we could. I had a feeling I knew why we felt this way, but I didn't have the courage to say it aloud. Dane had his nose to the ground and was tracking the scent. As we got closer to her back window he was near feral. I wasn't in a much better shape so I had not words to calm him, but the moment we realized that they had gone inside he was close to barging in and searching the place. I tried to link with Cruz, but Dane was the one in control right now and he couldn't focus on anything other than the scent of the intruder in Dylan's home. Dane was considering what would happen if he went into her house, but I knew that I had to jump in and try to reason with him. Dane, if they were in there still we would know it. We need to try and track them, but I need to reach Cruz. They were here, he spit. They were in her home and no one even picked up on their scent. He was right, but I needed to try to reach Cruz and get more information. Let's come up with a plan. Can you try to reach Cruz? For a few more moments he was crouched there under her window snarling and I was afraid he was going to lose it completely. Dane, we have to figure out what they want with Dylan. Could she be the reason that they keep coming back? I yelled at him. Whatever the reason, whether it was my words or my tone, I felt that he was trying to calm himself down. Shift with me, Aaron. Talk with Cruz and get as much information as you can, he demanded. While I was worried about being seen out here, I knew that this was the best option for us right now. Dane hurried back to the woods behind Dylan's house and immediately shifted with me. I crouched down behind the large trees and linked with Cruz. Surprised that he and his twin were still there with his sister and Dylan, I listened to his quick explanation. Apparently Lesia was helping Dylan prepare for her trip tomorrow so the three of them would be staying the night. I was a little conflicted with how I felt about that whole situation. While I was glad that she wouldn't be alone, I was angered that someone had dared to enter her house. Dane reinforced that he was jealous that Cruz and Nico got to be there with her while all we could do was be hide out here in the dirt like worms. Well, I mean I have been the one to make her life pretty **TTY for the past few years, so I'm sure that I was one of the last people she wanted to see right now. Cruz promised that he would contact me if anything happened, and I let him know that I was going to patrol the area here tonight. I sat here for a bit longer just thinking over everything from the things my uncle does, what he won't tell me, to the things that have happened with Dylan lately. Dane was still trying to think of a logical reason for things to be happening, but I wanted to shift and let him take control for a while. We ended up patrolling through the night with nothing happening. The scent eventually disappeared and I went back home a little after dawn. Knowing that she would be leaving the Packlands in a few hours I decided to try to get rest while I could, while I knew that she was still here and safe. My uncle always has a reason and purpose for everything that he does, so I knew that there was probably more to this trip than just a business meeting. Cruz had linked with me this morning and let me know that he and his brother would patrol the area until Dylan left. When I got back to the pack house I used the kitchen entrance to try to get in unseen. I made it up to my room before anyone noticed, took a fast shower, and threw myself into bed to try to rest for a moment. After about an hour, I knew there was no way that I could sleep, especially since my uncle was going to be leaving with Dylan any moment. Cruz had only linked me to let me know that nothing had happened and that he and his brother were headed home since the Alpha had already shown up. No matter what I wanted, I knew that there was nothing I could do once Dylan left the Packlands. I went down to the kitchens, grabbed some food, and took it with me when I left. There was nowhere I planned on going, I just knew that I had to keep busy. Of course, I ended up back outside Dylan's house. To my surprise though, I was not alone for long. Cruz walked over to me and grabbed a Pop-Tart from my bag of stolen goods. Hey, that's not for you, I grumbled with a mouthful of peanut butter crackers. We sat in comfortable silence for a bit and I was about to ask how his night had gone, but he beat me to it. So Aaron, are you going to tell me what the hell is going on with you and Dylan Solemeyer? 22. Dylan. Special, about me? Is that really the only reason why he brought me all the way here? Even though we're in this really fancy office, who did he think that he is? Why would just anyone be able to just demand my presence just to **CK with me for some reason? The gears were turning in my head and while I was trying to comprehend what was really going on here, I could feel Ray trying to figure things out as well. Rowan sat there still staring at me with an arrogant smile plastered on his face, but his eyes looked so intense that they looked like the ocean at twilight. I had to remember that I need this job and stay calm. Having no social skills really sucked because there was no point of reference for me to reflect on. Books have been my only source of information on how to handle real-life situations. Too bad the only books I read are dim fantasy romance books where none of that shit actually happens in someone's real life. I have no idea what to do here, I groaned internally to Ray. Shockingly she seemed about as lost as I was right now. With both of us floundering and unable to figure out how to maneuver, I ended up just fidgeting in my seat a bit. The clothes seemed to be too much, too tight, not me, and they were making me even more uncomfortable. Slowly, he leaned forward and placed both his elbows on the top of the desk. So Ms. Solemeyer, please enlighten me, or are you just as confused as I am? Okay, now I was definitely sure that he was making fun of me. As much as I hated to let others' words or actions affect me, I felt my eyes begin to water. I had been agonizing over this meeting for days, and now that I am finally here, this jerk is just going to treat me like this. Quickly looking away to the far windows, I blinked rapidly to keep the moisture in my eyes where it belonged. To say that I was no good at being discreet was obvious, and the moment I looked back in his direction, I knew he saw it because for a moment the grin on his face slipped. As you can see, there is nothing special about me, so if that is the only reason I was summoned, I guess this meeting is over. Where that sudden spike of courage, adrenaline, or stupidity came from I wasn't sure, but I knew that Ray was beyond proud. I could feel the smugness radiating through my mind. I grasped the arms of the chair and was about to stand when his large hand flashed out as if he was going to try to grab me, but I was faster than him. The only reason I let Alpha Rogan touch me was because I had no choice, but no others had that privilege. Ms. Solemeyer, I apologize, I was only joking. Please give me a moment to rectify this situation. Still sitting there with his arm outstretched, I watched the expressions morph from chagrin, to embarrassment, to subtle remorse. I knew I still needed to tread lightly because my job could still be on the line, but I didn't really know what to do. Noelle was outside waiting, but I had no idea when Alpha Rogan's meeting would be over and what would happen if I just walked out right now. How would he react to what happened here? Taking a few deep breaths, I pulled my chair a bit further away from his desk, and sat back down. The moment he was sure that I would stay, he sat up and adjusted his tie and collar. Even though I felt awful, I tried to hide it behind good posture and fake confidence, and apparently so did he. We both sat there for a moment just looking at the other until he cleared his throat. Let's start over, shall we? Before I could reply, he reached out his hand and spoke. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for agreeing to today's meeting. He left his hand outstretched and then nodded as if saying, this is where you greet me in return. Feeling foolish for not realizing what he wanted from me, I lurched forward and grasped his hand. I was instantly horrified when I realized my hand was too warm and moist against his, but he didn't say anything about it. Rowan squeezed firmly, but not roughly, and shook our joined hands swiftly before he quickly released it. I would like to start this meeting off by thanking you for coming all this way to meet with me. Nodding at him in acknowledgement, I silently thought that this guy was out of his mind, but it must have been enough for him to continue. It has come to my attention that you have worked with us for almost 3 years and that you have one of the most impeccable work records. While I knew how long I have worked for them, the record thing seemed good, so I smiled, but still asked, that's a good thing, right? For once the smile that appeared on his face looked genuine and real, and it somehow made me smile in response. Yes, it is a really good thing. As a matter of fact, at our last board meeting your name was brought up as one of the contenders for a new position that we are developing. The smile immediately left my face. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was almost positive that I did not put in any type of request to change my position. I actually really liked what I do. It's easy. Well, before you get upset again, I would like the opportunity to explain what I'm talking about. Will you hear me out? Again, I really don't have too many options at this point, so what real choice did I have but to sit here and listen to him? Okay, please continue. Yes, well, our company has been looking at branching out into different markets of communication, and this means that we have to either redistribute teams or create new ones. Nodding at him to let him know that I was still following along, he continued. Our development team has been working on ways to get this accomplished, and it was determined that we will need one additional team to work on this project. Things seemed okay to this point, so I just kept nodding. I'm sure I probably looked like a freaking bobblehead doll. The board wanted this new team to be made up of both current and new employees. Among the small list of candidates, your name was at the very top of that list. I was still following along, but this nod came a little slower. Hopefully this was letting him know that I was starting to get a little confused. Before he continued, he got up from behind his desk and walked over to the little fridge. Would you like something to drink, Ms. Solemeyer? Yes, water would be great, thank you, Rowan, or maybe I should be calling him Mr. Winters, even if it's only in my head. As he walked back over to the desk and handed me the cool water bottle, I was surprised that instead of walking back around to his side of the desk, he sat in the other seat next to me. I tried not to stare at him in a weird way, but I couldn't help but notice how easily he moved for such a big man. No, what am I thinking right now? Brain, please work normally, I kept repeating over and over in my head. Ray's husky laughter in my mind annoyed me, but helped me to focus, even if it was focusing on her. As Mr. Winters adjusted himself in the seat, I took the time to drink some of the water, and that also helped me focus a bit more. Too bad his next words threw all that work out the window. We decided that we would bring you in to talk to you about the new position and work on negotiating a new contract so that we can get you set up as soon as possible. Okay, things were not fully making sense. He brought me here to talk to me about a new position, and not to fire me. Well, this is good, I think. So this meeting was to talk to me about doing another job, not firing me after all. A look of surprise crossed his face. Why would you think that we were going to fire you? Yes, why did I think that? Oh, I don't know, because I have no real experience on how to deal with people, and I freaked out about losing the life I was trying to create for myself. But of course, I didn't share all of that with him. After the last call that we had, you seemed upset and apparently my mind ran away with itself. There, that sounded like a plausible explanation for my insane delusions apparently. Wow, well I wish I would have known that before, then I wouldn't have given you so much sh*t when you first arrived. There is no way that we would let such a valuable employee go, especially when she hasn't even seen her true potential. I didn't want to let his words make me feel or think things that may or may not happen, so I decided to just sit still and listen. This new position comes with a bigger salary, additional perks, and benefits that the company can offer, and the possibility to move up once the project is completed. Damn, this was starting to sound a little too good to be true, but I was trying really hard to seem composed. He continued talking, so the only thing that we need to finalize is when we can move you out here to be able to start working with the team. And there it was, the reason why I knew that I shouldn't have let myself get too excited about this. Before he could say anything else, I can't accept the offer. I'm sorry. This time I couldn't stop the tears from falling, or hide them from him. He was on his feet within seconds of me, and since he took the seat closest to the door there was gonna be no way to get around him and out of this room easily. Ms. Solomire, what is going on? Why are you responding this way to such a great opportunity? What could I say to him? No one is supposed to know about me, my struggles, my pain. Who would even understand when I didn't even know myself? No wolf would understand, and there is no way that this human could. My anger was building along with my despair and I didn't mean to get so loud, but it was hard to keep my emotions in check. Look, I don't want your job, I don't want to move, I like things the way that they are right now. Gods, why don't I ever get the opportunity to make **ing choices for myself? I guess I had gotten a little louder than I thought because the moment the last words came out of my mouth, Noelle barged into the room and was at my side. With the door wide open now, our unintentionally loud conversation was being broadcast to the rest of the people on the floor. Somehow I had forgotten that the one person I didn't want to know about any of this was just a door away from me. Mr. Winters seemed genuinely confused by my sudden outburst, and confused about why I had such an awful reaction to such a great opportunity. If only I could explain everything to him, to anyone really. I couldn't even be fully honest with Lesia in fear of what Alpha Rogan might do to her. Noelle was trying to get me out of the room, and when he grabbed my elbow to try to guide me around Roanne I flinched so hard that both of them immediately stopped. Why are you so afraid, Ms. Solomire? Dylan, what is going on here? Roanne growled and his gaze honed in on Noelle. I couldn't take it. I couldn't take this. I had to get out of here before I made things much worse. Noelle, can we please just leave? I asked him as we tried to walk to the door, but Roanne stepped in front of me. No one is going anywhere until I find out what the **ck is going on here. The look on Roanne's face startled me a bit, but something in me really wanted to just break down and tell him everything, and I probably might have if he hadn't shown up just then. Would someone like to tell me what is going on in here? Alpha Rogan purred from the still open doorway. 23. Rogan. Xavier had just finished with his board meeting when we finally arrived on the floor. It would have been nice if these two a-holes would have shown us the elevator instead of bringing us up those ridiculous stairs. As this was my first trip meeting Xavier at his office, I was unaware of the layout beforehand. No matter, this was more a pretense than anything. There was no way I was about to let her come here of all places, alone. Since I had to come up with a reason to accompany her, I decided it was about time to try to get a foothold in Aspen's board of trustees. VIT was more than just one of my guards, he was also great at intelligence work and he let me know that there was about to be a shift in managing partners. With things starting to happen on my lands, I needed to look into setting up additional contingency plans and funds if need be. There was nothing wrong with being overly cautious and I would not let an opportunity this good slip through my hands. As a matter of fact, we arrived just in time for VIT and I to see just exactly who sat on this board as their meeting came to a close. Favor falls on those who never rest, it seems. When Xavier finally welcomed us in, I could immediately see the changes in his appearance. Where he usually looked so put together and pristine, he appeared to be run down and a bit frazzled. This only heightened my desires to find out everything I could about this company and how I could utilize my position to my benefit. While I ran many rather lucrative businesses through multiple companies and holdings, I was always on the lookout for additional opportunities to dive into. Xavier was one of the few humans who knew who and what I am, and that made him as much of a liability as an asset to me. Regardless, I was more than confident that I could handle him if need be, but I will use him for everything I can for the time being. Must not have been a very good meeting by the look on your face, I greeted him casually. When he reached out to shake my hand I made sure to give it a nice firm squeeze. I decided to let VIT sit in with us since he usually knows what's going on in these types of companies before I do. Xavier had his assistant bring out some refreshments and I knew he was already on the verge of giving me all the information I needed. I'm sure you're here to see what kind of insider tips you can get out of me, but unfortunately you're too late. I definitely wasn't expecting that, but before I led on to how unfortunate that was, I needed to know what had happened. Aspen is one of the companies that has always eluded my reach and I needed to find out why. You judge me so harshly, old friend. I'm only here for personal reasons and I had some extra time in my schedule to make a house call. Per Essie, I chuckled. Too bad I know you better than you'd like. It's been a busy few weeks and I don't have much time to spare, so just tell me what it is you really came here for. He sighed. Well, if he insisted, I might as well just put it all out there. I'd like to get in on the board of trustees if there's an opening. I hadn't expected him to laugh as hard as he did. Honestly, with the amount of energy that he exerted I was waiting for him to inevitably pass out. But, to my dismay, he eventually composed himself enough to explain the situation. I thought you were usually the one to know what was going on before anyone else. How is that this one got past someone like you? My patience was wearing thin, and when I glanced over at VIT, I could see how annoyed he was as well. If there was nothing for me to gain or obtain, then this truly was just a personal visit. Well, it seems that I'm losing my touch, old friend. Why don't you enlighten me and let me know what changes are happening behind my back? VIT's face gave away nothing, but the clench of his fist at his side said enough. He traded information like others exchanged money, and that was one of the main reasons I kept him so close. Aspen is acquiring new contacts within the communications industry, and the CEO has decided to take the company in a new direction to make us true competition in the market. Wait, CEO? Aspen had been run by a board since the original creator had passed away suddenly almost 2 decades ago. This was news, and vital news at that. If this had truly happened this quickly with no one the wiser, there could be other reasons behind such a move. Who could have come in and suddenly done this? I needed to find out and see if I could get a meeting scheduled to secure a place in the things to come. It seems Gideon's heir finally decided to make his move and has gained enough shares to usurp the board and fully buy out the company with no room for opposition. I linked quickly with VIT. What heir? I demanded angrily. VIT's wince was a sign about how much of a problem this may turn out to be. Well, there had to be someone helping him from the inside for him to know how to get this done so stealthily. Or was this company ripe for a takeover? The look that passed over his face was confirmation that I hit it either right on the head or pretty goddamn close. You know, Rogan, if you were human, you would have been one of the biggest businessmen in this city, Xavier said. I didn't know if I should be offended or flattered, but I had to acknowledge his statement. Only the gods know why some of us are born blessed and why some of are forced to suffer the mundane mortal life of humankind. VIT snorted softly beside me, and I had to admit, I can have a sense of humor at times. Unfortunately, my little comment seemed to fuel a little of the fire that seemed to have gone out in Xavier. Always too smart for your own **ing good, aren't you? Well, you were right. Gideon's son started working here in the company a few years ago and slowly started working his way up. A few weeks ago he set his plan in motion. Well, maybe I might like this fellow after all. Someone who is willing to get their hands dirty to attain their goals are just the kind of people I like around me. The meeting we just had was the final board meeting to release all those who did not want to take other positions within the company. Essentially, those who did not want to take the demotion were sent away with severance packages. Well, **ing played. Did anyone confirm that he is truly Gideon's heir? I heard the accident had taken his life and the life of his family. This board must have been weaker than I thought. If some boy had come in and taken his father's company right out from under their noses, either they were incompetent fools or he was much smarter than most. His anger was getting the better of him. Of course we did. What do you take me for? That was the first thing that I thought of, but everything came back proving that he was who he said he was. VIT linked with me to let me know that he was going to work on how he didn't know about this beforehand. This was something I thought had been taken care of almost 20 years ago. This might end up being more of a problem later, so I needed to know exactly where Xavier stood now. So was this your last board meeting, or did you decide to stay on with Gideon's progeny? I needed to see what cards I had left and which ones I had to put away. Don't worry, Rogan, I'm staying on in a different capacity. I will be assisting the new CEO with all of the day-to-day duties while he continues to work on some new programs he is developing. Well, I may still find some use in Xavier after all. I was about to ask some more questions, but we suddenly heard some loud voices coming from outside the room. Xavier looked a little confused and we were about to ignore it and move on, but the voices got louder again. Xavier called over one of the assistants on the intercom and asked if they knew what was going on. The voice on the other end stated that they would send someone to go and check it out. I was about to have VIT go outside and see what was going on, but he suddenly linked me. Noel is not responding to me. If Noel was not responding, then that probably meant that something was either wrong with Dylan or he was in a position that he needed to appear like he was human. We needed to get up and get out of this room. I needed to go and find Dylan before she ran into Gideon's heir. Xavier, why don't we go out and see what is going on? There can't be many other offices on this floor, right? The shock in Xavier's eyes let me know that he hadn't considered who else was on this floor until right now. Yes, you're right. Let me go and see what is going on. The only other offices on this floor are mine and Roanne's. Wait, why did that name sound so familiar right now? Zane was growling in my head. Roanne was the name of that a-hole from this morning. He is the one who called himself Dylan's boss. What the **ck had I just ended up setting in motion? Zane was quietly cursing me, and for once I let it slide because I knew I deserved it. Xavier stood to go out in the hall and VIT and I immediately followed him. As soon as he opened the door, I heard two voices and immediately recognized one. The moment I heard Dylan's voice, Zane's fury forced me to move and I was heading toward the only open door on this floor. She was nearby and I had to find her. If that man, Roanne Winters, who she was meeting with, was Gideon's heir, then I needed to get her out of here as soon as possible. The door to the office they were in was open and I saw Noel standing right next to Dylan, but they were blocked in by that man, Roanne. I wanted to shift. I wanted to push him out of the way and get Dylan the hell out of here now, but I knew better than that. Walking into the room to fully assess the situation, I linked VIT to go and get the car and made sure I got their attention. The look he gave me when I asked my question only made me smile wickedly. Game on a hole. 24. Dylan. Alpha Rogan was standing just inside the door now, and I knew that whatever plans I had about getting out of here without him finding out about this had just vanished. Everyone in the room was now looking at the new guest, and the look on Rowan's face was filled with a mix of curiosity and frustration. Since when did people start entering offices without getting permission first? He blurted out as he stared back and forth between Noelle and the Alpha. I can't lie, I was pretty impressed by the way he carried himself and his lack of sheer care of who Alpha Rogan was and the position that he held. It helped that he probably had no idea who he really was, but still, I was impressed. Now, if I can manage to get myself out of this without revealing everything to Alpha Rogan, then maybe I can get out of here with a job and the ability to keep the little life that I'm trying to build for myself. Noelle was still standing so close to me that I could feel his breath on my shoulder, but so far he was just there, which was oddly comforting. Rowan was still looking towards Alpha Rogan, and right now, I wished more than anything that I could link with Noelle and tell him to play along with me. Since I had no luck in that department, I considered whispering to him. The moment I tilted my head to attempt it, Rowan immediately turned his attention back towards me. Finally ready to tell me what the FCK is going on, Ms. Solemeyer, and why this a whole has now joined our little party. Even though the tone of Rowan's voice was angry, I honestly didn't think it was directed at me, because his eyes seemed a bit worried or concerned, and maybe that was his true emotion. Stopping mid-exhale, I knew that if I tried to say anything to Noelle now, everyone in this room would hear. Hell, everyone on this floor would probably hear with how quiet it sounded. Alpha Rogan seemed to be trying to puzzle things out because the look on his face was different, not mad per se, but just off somehow. I've seen him angry, and thankfully, we were not there yet at least. Alpha Rogan hadn't attempted to link with Noelle because I hadn't seen his eyes with that slight wispy haze in them, and I could only assume that it was due to Rowan's presence. Ms. Solemeyer, is there a reason why you have suddenly become mute? Are you afraid of either of the gentlemen here in this room? He asked while looking only at me, but speaking to us all. No, I couldn't give him any impression that I was afraid of Alpha Rogan, even though he scared the hell out of me at times. Ray was speaking to me softly. Do not be afraid, little one. He cannot hurt you here, and you have not done anything wrong. I almost scoffed out loud, but I quickly caught myself. She knew just as well as I did that I didn't have to do anything wrong for him to lose his temper and punish me for one thing or another. Rowan continued staring at me, and it was starting to get a little awkward. The more time that I had to look at his face, I was able to appreciate just how handsome he was. Letting my eyes flick to the door, I saw VIT come up next to Alpha Rogan and another gentleman who I was pretty sure hadn't been outside when we first arrived. The other man who joined him was a handsome-looking older fellow with salt and pepper hair. While he had a similar build to Alpha Rogan, it was apparent that he was not only human, but he might possibly be ill or maybe extremely tired. Wondering if he was the man that Alpha Rogan was supposed to have a meeting with, I watched as he observed the scene inside the office. His dark brown eyes took in all four of us, and I could see the clench of his jaw as he just kept looking between us all. How many more men were going to join us? I needed to figure out a way to talk myself out of here. Well, here goes nothing. I apologize, I might have mishandled the situation earlier, and I think that I was just a bit taken off guard by this whole experience. I shouldn't have let my nerves get the best of me. There, that should do it, right? I said enough without saying too much. I turned to Noelle. I think it's time that we leave Mr. Winter's office now. When I looked up at him, I silently mouthed, please. He didn't make any movement or say anything in response, but I knew that he saw it when he said, of course, little miss, I shall escort you to the car if you are done here. Thank the gods that Noelle was the one beside me and not VIT, because I was sure that he would not be trying to help me out of this. Nodding at him, I moved and started walking towards the door when Rowan walked right in front of me. This close to him, I could see his eyes darken as he looked down at me, and I couldn't help the sudden hitch in my breath. Gods, he is a really, really good-looking man, and he smelled divine. I took a deep sniff in through my nose, and his smoky sweet scent filled my thoughts completely. Just as quick as I sniffed him, yes, sniffed him, he leaned in and did the exact same thing to me, but covered it up by leaning in and whispering in my ear. If you are afraid of these men, say the word and I will make sure that no one leaves with you, he softly breathed in my ear. Gods? The heat of his warm breath sent a little shiver down my spine, and I was sure that my cheeks were probably bright red by now. When he pulled away from me, I felt like he expected me to tell him in one way or another that I was scared of one of these men. Little did he know that I wasn't just scared of them, I was terrified of at least one of them. Alpha Rogan walked over to me and placed his hand on the middle of my back. I tried to hide the sudden stiffness, but even though I smiled, I know that both Alpha Rogan and Mr. Winters caught my response. VIT stayed outside, but the other person walked in as well, but he walked over to Rowan's side. They quickly exchanged a few words with each other, and then Rowan laughed quite loudly. So, it seems Xavier thinks that I should formally introduce myself to you. Rogan, right? While I do not see the importance of this, I will accommodate his request. He winked at Alpha Rogan and said, I go by Rowan Winters, but my legal name used to be Gabriel Aspen, the son and heir of Gideon Aspen. The look on everyone's faces was definitely something to behold. Noelle looked surprised, VIT looked annoyed, but Alpha Rogan looked completely unnerved. As shocked as I was about their reactions, the one who surprised me the most was Ray. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and I could feel her wishing that she could shift for some odd reason. Unsure of why everyone was having such a weird reaction to his name hit me a bit later than it probably should. Aspen? Aspen? Why did that sound familiar for some reason? I must have had some stupid look on my face because Rowan, or Gabriel, whoever he was, smiled at me with a look of utter satisfaction. It hit me then. Aspen. That was the name of the company. Wait, if that was the name of the company, then that means, you're my boss, I blurted louder than I would have liked. He cocked an eyebrow at me. I've always been your boss, Ms. Solemeyer. Okay, now I understood why he had an office on the highest floor of the building and why he had a whole entourage this morning. No, you're not just my boss, you're like my boss's boss's boss. The husky laugh that he let out was different than his laugh from earlier. This one was deep and throaty like he hadn't expected it. Yes, Ms. Solemeyer, that is one way to say it. Another way is to say that I am the owner of Aspen Communications, but I kind of like the boss of all bosses. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Joking at my expense was not really nice, but I was honestly confused. If he was the owner of the company, why would he work as my manager for so long? Why would he honestly work at all? Alpha Rogan cleared his throat and inclined his head to Rowan or Gabriel, whatever his name really was. It seems congratulations are in order, Mr. Winters. I would love to set up a meeting with you soon to discuss what type of opportunities that I can help you with. Though Alpha Rogan was smiling at Rowan, I could feel that he was bothered for some reason by this revelation. Rowan seemed to think over his words for a moment, then looked over to Xavier. If you think that there is anything he can do for us, let me know and then you can set something up. If not, don't bother. Alpha Rogan let out a disgusted snarl, but didn't lash out like I could see he wished to. Not only had Rowan disrespected him, he had blatantly ignored his offer. VIT spoke up suddenly. Sir, it seems that we may be late for your next meeting if we do not leave soon. I honestly wasn't sure if there truly was another meeting that they had to attend, but Alpha Rogan nodded in his direction. Yes, thank you for reminding me, VIT. With the hand he still had placed on my back, he pressed just enough to let me know that he wished for me to leave this office. Rowan didn't step in front of me this time. As I headed towards the door, I turned back before walking out. Thank you again, Mr. Winters. It was a pleasure meeting you and I thank you for the continued opportunity to be a part of this, your company. Bowing to him, I then turned around and walked out the door completely surrounded by VIT, Noel, and Alpha Rogan. We stood in front of the wall that held the elevator, and when the door finally slid open, Rowan and the other gentleman walked in with us. To say that the ride down was uncomfortable was an understatement. I was disappointed that I couldn't watch from the back wall as we traveled back down to the first floor. As we all got off the elevator, there was small pleasantries exchanged as we said our goodbyes, and I was excited that I had managed to get out of this without Alpha Rogan finding out any of Rowan's plans. VIT had gone to get the car and had pulled it up right in front of the door. We were walking out when a voice called after me, "Oh, and Ms. Solemeyer, please let me know if you ever choose to reconsider my offer." I winced, but did not turn back to look at him because I could feel the eyes of Alpha Rogan burning holes into my back. As soon as Noel helped me into the car and had gotten into the front passenger seat, VIT was driving away from the property. Even though I didn't look at Alpha Rogan, I knew that he had not just heard what Rowan had said, but he was dying to know what he meant. The second that we passed through their guard station and were back on that long stretch of road, he leaned over and grabbed my face. His fingers squeezed so hard that I knew that I would have finger-shaped bruises by tonight. Snapping my head towards him, he squeezed even harder and then practically growled at me. "What the F***ck did he offer you, Dylan?" 25. Dylan. Tell me now, Dylan, what was that man talking to you about? He growled so close to my face that I could feel his spit hit in a few different spots. Alpha Rogan has punished me before, but he has never hurt me in front of anyone else. Right now I wasn't sure if I was afraid or glad that we were not alone. These two men, regardless of how kind they may have been to me, were some of his personal guards, and I knew that their loyalties lied with him and him alone. Apparently, my lack of response seemed to enrage him even more, and he squeezed even harder. The pressure increased to the point where I had no choice but to try to pull away. When he felt me pulling away from him, he responded by yanking me toward him so hard that I was forced out of my seat and onto my knees almost in front of him. The force of my knees hitting the floor of the vehicle combined with the pain from his hand were too much. The sob that escaped out of my mouth was strangled from the way he still held my face. In this position I couldn't see if the two in the front of the vehicle were watching or if they could even do anything right now, but I didn't care. Hot tears filled my eyes and rolled down my cheeks, but Alpha Rogan still didn't let me go. There was a quick flash in his dark eyes and he seemed to be pleased or excited by my reaction to him just now. With me being so close to him, he turned my face to the side and I felt him lean his body extremely close to mine. His cheek brushed mine as he brushed against me, and I could feel his hot breath against my ear as he whispered, "You will answer your alpha now, or this will just be the beginning of what I will do to you." Closing my eyes, I tried to control the tears and sobs that were now flowing freely from me. Trying to move my mouth to speak was painful, and only odd-sounding breaths and slurred words were coming out. Still holding himself against me, I couldn't pull away even if I wanted to, but he suddenly growled in my ear and I wasn't sure if he was getting angrier at me, but I knew he could feel my body begin to shake. Ray was furious. She was screaming in my head to the point that I wished I could shut her up because it was making my head hurt even worse. Suddenly, Alpha Rogan pushed me backwards and I ended up landing awkwardly on my behind the passenger seat. "Apparently, my driver thinks that you can't answer me when I grip you that way," he said with a bit of annoyance in his voice. Afraid to move, I quickly explained the encounter I had with Rowan with little to no detail. He listened intently, but looked out the window while we continued to drive back. Listening to my own voice while I spoke, I could hear certain words come out with lisps on certain letters, and I knew that my mouth and tongue were probably already swelling. The moment I was done speaking, he asked, "Noelle, why was she allowed to be alone in the room with that man?" I watched Alpha Rogan, who was still staring at the window, and considered getting up off the floor. Noelle responded to him immediately. Mr. Winters was adamant that he meet with her alone and questioned why she would not be allowed to have a meeting with her boss. He seemed to be contemplating Noelle's words, because I could see his right hand clench and unclench. Finally, he turned from the window and looked towards where Noelle Saturday. "Regardless of what that boy said, my instructions were for you to stay with her at all times," he snarled. Fear filled me, and even though Ray was trying her best to soothe me and remind me that I could handle the pain, it didn't help. Noelle didn't bother with an excuse or explanation. Instead, he took responsibility for his actions and apologized. "I failed you, Alpha, and for that I am sorry." Something about the way that Alpha Rogan looked at him made me think that he was already planning ways to make Noelle truly sorry, and the tears continued to flow. Eventually Alpha Rogan looked down towards me and extended his hand. I flinched back so hard that I ended up smacking the back of my head on the door. Cocking his head to the side, he sighed softly, and in the span of a heartbeat, his whole demeanor changed. He slowly reached out his hand to me and crooned, "Dylan, please let me help you get back into your seat." For a moment, I didn't move. I watched him seem to become a completely different person right before my eyes, and I wasn't sure if I should really trust him. "Dylan, I'm sorry that I lost my temper a moment ago. I know you're probably scared, but you know that I would never hurt you for no reason, don't you?" he said. Questioning his words, I repeated them over and over again in my head as I still sat there on the floor. Am I overreacting? Did he just lose his temper? Did I deserve his anger for going against his orders? Would he really punish me for no reason? Ray was combating my thoughts just as quick as I was thinking them, and she was practically screaming inside my head. "Don't listen to him, Dylan. He is manipulating you. He would hurt you if he could." I didn't speak, but since I didn't reach for his outstretched hand, he pushed himself forward almost out of his seat, and leaned out to grab me with both hands. The only thing I could do was close my eyes and wait to see what he was going to do now. My heart was beating so fast that I swore I could feel it pounding inside my head. But instead of feeling the pain I was expecting, he placed his hands under my arms and lifted me back onto my seat. A startled squeal escaped me the moment I felt his hands on me, but I stifled it the second I realized that his touch wasn't intended to hurt, but to help. My eyes flew open and I briefly looked at him before I glanced to the front of the car, suddenly feeling very embarrassed. Both Noelle and VIT were facing forward, so I couldn't see their faces, but I swore that the veins in VIT's neck were bulging. Not wanting Alpha Rogan to direct his attention to his guards in case he would snap again, and direct any anger towards them. Even though they were bigger and much stronger than me, I liked them and didn't wish to see Alpha Rogan hurt them in any way if I could prevent it. Trying to look anywhere except for at him, I looked past him to the window behind him and noticed that we had left the city far behind us. With this being my first time off the Packlands, I wasn't absolutely sure where we were, but the scenery looked familiar and I was almost certain that we were nearly home. A sudden ache settled in my chest at the thought of going back there so soon. I honestly had not had a moment to process any of the things I saw or heard, and I truly wished we could stay away for longer. Going back there felt like I was going back to a cage. The Packlands meant freedom for most, but to me it felt suffocating. This is the place where I had to hide who and what I am from everyone around me so that I'm not persecuted for things I never had anything to do with. Freedom was one of the many things that was kept from me, and I knew the moment that we got back Alpha Rogan would try to hide me away and throw away the key if he could. Just once, I wish that there was someone that I could talk with to find out about my parents other than Alpha Rogan. He was never forthcoming with information about them other than restating the things that he has already told me hundreds of times. I could feel his eyes on my face, but I still wasn't ready to look at him just yet. Regardless of whether or not he meant to hurt me or not, the fact is that he did and has on many occasions. "Dylan," he called me softly so that he would draw my attention back to him, and of course, it worked. Slowly, I turned to face him, even though I didn't want to because I knew better than to show him anything other than obedience. I also knew better than to flinch again when he reached out to touch my face. With the softest of pressure, he caressed my cheek. Ray was seething, but she knew as well as I did that there was no point in fighting him. All that it would do is make him angry again. He made a show of staring at my face as if he was inspecting the damage that he caused. "Dylan, were you aware that Mr. Winters was the owner of Aspen Communications before coming to this meeting?" The questions threw me off for a moment, but I didn't hesitate when I responded. "No, Mr. Winters has been my immediate manager for the past few years and I never imagined that he was the owner of the entire company. Why would someone work such a position when they own the entire thing? It doesn't make sense to me." Those last questions were more to myself than to him, but he was nodding along with me as if my questions were either the same or similar to his own. For a moment he just sat there nodding, but even though he was staring at me, he wasn't actually looking at me. I took the opportunity to push myself back in the seat and put a little distance between us. Glancing back out the window, I noticed that we were getting further away from all the signs of the city. It seemed that it took much less time to return home than it had taken for us to reach Aspen. The closer to home we got, the harder it felt to breathe. I know it was all in my head, but it felt like I was headed back to hell. The only bright part of returning home was seeing Lesia. I had completely forgot to check my phone the whole time we have been gone, and I was about to reach in my pocket to grab it out when Noelle called from the front seat. Are you feeling well, little miss, or are you starting to get car sick again? That's right, I had completely forgotten how sick I had gotten when we first left. I'm sure that with everything that had happened, my mind had been so distracted that I hadn't had a chance to focus on it. Alpha Rogan, who had still been lost in thought, snapped out of it and looked at me again. Yes, are you feeling unwell again, Dylan? I'm sure you have gone through quite a bit today, and being in a car is not easy the first few times. Huh? Did he really think that being in a car was the hardest thing that I had to deal with today? Let's see how he tries to turn this into just another event where I forced his hand to discipline or punish me and he was only doing what he had to. I'm not feeling great, but I don't think that the car ride is having the same effects on me this time as it did earlier. A small smirk played across his lips and he reached out and squeezed my left knee with his big hand. Not a rough squeeze, but it felt like he was telling me to watch my mouth. That's very good to hear, Noelle grunted from the front seat, and VIT gave a quick nod when he caught my eyes in that mirror that hung from the ceiling. No one spoke for a bit, but it wasn't long until I saw the Packlands come into view and I almost let out a sigh of displeasure. As we approached the western gate, I noticed that there was quite a bit more soldiers here than there had been when we left. When I glanced around the gate and then back to Alpha Rogan, I knew that he was linking with someone. I kept looking between the gates and the man sitting next to me, waiting to find out what was going on. Suddenly, VIT stopped the car and Noelle got out. I watched as he started running and in mid-stride shifted into a large grey wolf. I was so impressed by his size and the speed of how quickly he ran to the gate, I didn't realize that VIT and Alpha Rogan were speaking to each other. This was a planned attack, sir. We need to get within the walls of the Packlands and find out what areas were hit, VIT quickly spoke. Attack. Hit. What were they talking about? Alpha Rogan looked between VIT, the gates, and then myself. His eyes had that gleam in them for a moment before he finally spoke. Take Dylan straight home and stay with her there. No one, and I repeat no one, is allowed to see her until I have taken care of this situation. Do I make myself clear? Even though I knew he was talking to VIT, he was looking straight at me, and all I could do was nod. 26. Dylan. Falling back into the same routine was much too easy. It has been about 3 weeks since I took the trip to the city with Alpha Rogan. So much happened that day, and yet it felt like I was right back where I had always been. Lesia and her brothers were probably the only thing that I looked forward to lately. They had invited me to come over to meet their parents for dinner, but I still wasn't fully ready for that. The three of them didn't push too hard since they were much too excited to spend all their extra time at my house. Lesia said her brothers liked it because no one there told them what to do. Regardless of why they liked being here didn't matter to me so much as the fact that they were here at all. It felt nice to have friends here and it made everything else bearable. School had resumed, and even though no one talked to me still, neither did they bother me. It seemed that seeing Lesia and her brothers around me made me seem somewhat normal. Work continued with little to no changes and I hadn't heard from Mr. Winters once. I did, however, get a new manager who felt the need to check in with me often. Today was the first day that I didn't have school or work and I was already scheduled to hang out with the Silveras. Ray, however, wanted me to ask for a rain check instead because she insisted I let her out for a run. From the moment I had woken up today, she was filling my head with anything she could think of to persuade me. Unfortunately, she was forgetting Alpha Rogan's words from the night we returned. VIT had accompanied me home that day and had insisted to search the area before he even let me get out of the car. When we were on the porch, he made me wait again while he searched the house. At first VIT locked me in and I could hear him outside on the front porch and walking around the outside of the house every 20 to 30 minutes. I had invited him to come sit inside with me, but he refused, as kindly as he could. For the first few hours, I let it go and went out to offer him water every so often. Using my current confinement to my advantage, I decided to do a deep cleaning in the house. Sweeping, mopping, dusting, and even going through my closet only took up a few hours. When day turned into night, I decided to make something for the both of us to eat. There had been no word from the Alpha, at least not to me, and cooking helped me clear my mind. As soon as the food was done, I tried again to see if VIT would join me inside to eat, but he continued to refuse me. I was already resolved to bringing him out a plate, but I felt sad about his adamant refusal. I had only taken a few steps away from him when I started speaking. VIT didn't seem like he would be moved by my words, but for some strange reason I felt the urge to tell him. I don't know what you may know about me, but I don't have many friends. Most people avoid me, or make fun of me, or just hate me for no reason. Since you are showing me kindness, I wanted to show my appreciation the only way I know how. The crunch of his footsteps had ceased, but after I said my piece, I went ahead and walked inside. When I made it to the kitchen I heard a sharp knock on the door before the knob turned. VIT opened it slowly. It would be my pleasure to share a meal with you, Ms. Solemeyer, if the offer still stands. I couldn't hold back the smile that spread across my face. Even though VIT was nowhere near as kind to me as Noelle had been, I was still glad that my words had made him reconsider my offer. We made it through a very quick and quiet meal. There was no small talk, and when he was done he thanked me for the food before heading back outside. It wasn't until I had finished cleaning up the meal, showered, and was about to start reading in the living room that Alpha Rogan finally showed up. His voice outside my door was loud and angry and I really didn't want him coming in. The incident from that morning was still fresh in my mind and my jaw ached suddenly. Ray was cursing him in my head, but it didn't halt the fear in my heart. I was trying to force myself to go out and confront him, but the fear gripped me and kept me locked in place. Alpha Rogan was kind, but only when he wanted to be. He was strong and could be brutal from one moment to the next, and I wasn't sure what mood he was in right now, and that made me pause. I knew that he was speaking aloud because he wanted me to hear what he was saying to VIT. Standing by the door, I listened to him, but couldn't force myself to open up and go outside. Our borders are secure, and all gates have double the guard and patrol coverage. There was nothing left but the message. Meet up with Noel and Mark at the Northern Watchtower and inform me once things are set up. Mark? That name both piqued my interest and sounded unfamiliar. So there had been an attack on the Packlands and someone had left a message. I wondered what the message may have said and where someone may have left it. There was no comment from VIT, at least not one that I heard before the second knock of the night sounded. Knowing who it was made me afraid to reach out and open it, but I knew that even if I didn't he would just come in. Before he knocked again, I lurched for the door before I ended up pissing him off. Good evening, Alpha, I greeted him meekly. He brushed past me and quickly walked inside, but turned to a figure that I had not seen there a moment before. Stay within linking distance, he ordered to the unidentifiable person before closing the door behind him. The moment we were both inside, I headed straight to the kitchen to offer him something. Would you like something to eat or drink? I grabbed myself some water, but he immediately declined. No, I will not be staying long, I just needed to come and explain some things to you before I head back out, he said. He walked over to the table, but did not sit, so when I walked over to him I stayed near the opposite end. There was someone here while we were away today, however they did not do anything but let us know of their presence. The mere fact that they were able to get on my lands is inconceivable, he growled. I held my breath for a moment while I waited for him to continue, knowing that if I asked what the message said he could possibly fly into another rage like this morning. Alpha Rogan ran his hands through his mustache hair and took a few deep breaths, but then finally continued. Until we figure out who this is, you are not to go anywhere other than school, the pack house, or the grocery shops. And, under no circumstances are you to shift and let Ray out, he demanded. Yes, Alpha, I understand. I bowed to him in acknowledgement as Ray simultaneously ranted wildly about his words. The look that he was giving me was intense, and I knew that one wrong word or move on my part would push him over the edge that he so obviously was balanced on. A howl sounded outside and my heart started to race, but he said, do not worry, that is just the patrols letting you know they are still here since you cannot link with them. Well, I didn't know if I should be thankful or if it was just another reason that would make them all look down on me. I couldn't help but glance to the front window, and Alpha Rogan saw it. Dylan, I know what you are thinking. They will inform you of their presence and nothing more, but they are one of the main reasons why you need to keep Ray hidden. Alpha Rogan's eyes glimmered and I knew that he was linking with someone, and it must have been really important because he was already walking for the door before his eyes had gone back to their usual color. I wanted to ask him for more information about what was going on out there, but when he grabbed the door and turned back to me his eyes were more black than their usual blue color. This is my one and only warning, Dylan. Under no circumstances am I to find out that you disobeyed me. If you do, your life will become much, much worse. There was nothing I could honestly say to that. I had no idea how he could make my life any worse, but I was absolutely terrified about what he might think up to make that come happen. Ray had been asking to be let out every day since then, but her persistence today was much more intense than all the others. With so much to think about, I decided to run through some workouts to try to help myself focus before going through my clothes to pick out a somewhat decent outfit for the day. Even though the Silveras were coming over here to make lunch and watch movies, like usual, the joy that came with their visits made me want to put a little extra effort into my appearance. Lesia had been texting me from the moment she woke up this morning, and I felt like she was giving me a play-by-play of her day. It was funny how much joy she got out of giving out such trivial information. My phone was going off about every 5 to 10 minutes and I was about to get into the shower when I looked at the last message. Lesia asked if I would be okay with Cruz bringing his friend with them, and though I was a little worried, I agreed. Lesia's brothers were just as kind as she was, and I knew that they probably had good taste in friends. I sent back sure before I jumped into the shower. Ray was getting pissed at the fact that she knew I was completely ignoring her. Deciding to help drown her out with some music, I put on one of my playlists on my phone and took my time singing along in the shower. The music worked wonders to lighten my mood, so I kept it on while I dressed and fixed my hair. After Lesia's little makeover, she had convinced me to order some new clothes from some online stores. Since a few of the things came in this past week, I decided to impress her by wearing one of the outfits she helped me choose. I chose some light blue skinny jeans with distressed patches on the legs, a white peasant blouse, and some sparkly sandals that showed off my freshly painted hot pink toes. Since I still haven't learned all the ins and outs of putting on makeup, I just put on a little lip gloss and pulled my wild mane into what I learned to be called a messy bun on the top of my head. The music coming from my phone was now a mix of my playlist and some songs that Lesia and her brothers had insisted I listen to so that I could broaden my horizons, or so they said. I didn't know this song, but it had a really catchy tune and I was whistling along when I heard the knocking on the front door. Taking the time to get ready really took quite a bit of time, and I hadn't realized that it was time for them to come already. Rushing to get the door, I grabbed the phone and turned the music off. I hadn't realized I had missed like 10 messages and I was quickly trying to read through them as I walked to get the door. I'm coming, I called out as I was walking down the little hallway into the living room as I continued to scroll through all of Lesia's texts. The last message was up on the screen when I reached out for the doorknob. Unsure I had read it correctly, I tried to read a bit slower to make sure that it truly said what I had first thought. I sucked in a large breath and was about to pull my hand back, but it was too late. The knob was already turning and the door was being opened. Why hadn't I paid better attention to my phone? If I had, I would have been able to either stop this from happening or prepare myself. Lesia's last message read, "Hey doll, I know you said you were cool with my brother's friend, but I completely forgot to let you know that it's Aaron." Like Aaron? Are you sure you're gonna be okay with it? Lesia swung the door open wide and sure enough, there were 4 figures instead of the usual 3 who came to visit. I swallowed down my nerves and welcomed them all inside. This was going to be an interesting evening. 27. Aaron. Last night was the first time I was finally able to hang out with Nico and Cruz since everything happened that F***ing day. From the moment the alarm sounded I had been tracking, patrolling, and receiving punishments for all kinds of sh**t. Cruz had been with me when all hell had broken loose, but after that day I had no time to even text him, let alone see him or anyone outside of the guards or my uncle. Vit and Noel had gone with Dylan and my uncle, so when the calls went out about an intruder on the Packlands, the beta, Harper was the one in charge. Unlike my uncle, Harper was not able to link with all the wolves of the pack at once, so he linked with a few in succession and had them all reach out to others and so on and so on. In less than 5 minutes all of the guards were being sent to the walls, guard gates, and as much of the borderlands as possible. With so much land, there was not enough wolves to be in all places at once, but we have trained for scenarios like this and we knew our lands and their weaknesses better than anyone. Information was coming in waves so no one was completely sure of what was truly going on. Before I knew it, Cruz had been called to meet up with his father and brother and I was teamed up with Mark and 2 other guards. When we had gotten to the northern border Mark was relying on me to give him updates. Some knew that he was not a wolf, but everyone who did was smart enough to know who he worked for and to leave it be. The 4 of us, 2 in their wolf form and Mark and I in our human forms, were just shy of the northern gate. Since this was the area we had most often found the strangers sent, this is where Harper thought we should go. Harper was linking with me directly and somehow I had been put in charge of my team. Mark had abilities that not everyone was aware of, but I had a feeling that these 2 knew of them. I was unsure if my uncle was aware of what was happening, but at the same time, we still didn't really know what was going on ourselves. Mark seemed to be a bit nervous and I couldn't blame him because everything seemed to be too well timed to be a coincidence. There were guards at the gate and I could hear the howls of wolves in the woods around us, but the one thing that I kept thinking was that I was glad that Dylan wasn't here. The thought came so suddenly, but Dane agreed with it immediately. Somehow I was sure that whoever or whatever was happening had something to do with the scent around Dylan's house. Harper finally linked me and said that we were to search for any and every sign that didn't belong to someone in our pack. Apparently there was a message that had been left on the side of the new training grounds, but no one was sure of when it was made or how long it has been there. I told the 3 that were with me what Harper had said. It suddenly occurred to me as I was relaying the information that while he had said there was a message left, he had not told me what it said. Since Mark needed me in human form, I decided to stay with him, and I sent the other 2 out with strict instructions to run parallel to each other at all times and to let me know the second they find anything. Mark was much more talkative than I had ever seen him and he kept throwing out all different kinds of ideas and scenarios that he was running through in his head. If they were waiting for the best time to let us know that they are watching us, now was the perfect time. He uttered more to himself than to me. He was right. For them to have chosen now when Alpha Rogan and 2 of his strongest guards were gone, was more than just a coincidence. As we walked Mark continued his mumbling and some of it was coherent, but most of it was just random ramblings that didn't make much sense since I only caught every few words. Unfortunately, the few that I did catch only made the scenarios that were now playing in my head that much worse. We walked around and I waited to hear from Harper, but I hadn't realized just how long it had been since I last heard from him. I checked in with the other 2 guards that I had with me and they hadn't come across anything. Mark was supposed to be sensing for magic or spells or whatever it is that he used. My mind kept trying to figure out why someone would be targeting out Pack so suddenly. If it truly had something to do with Dylan, then why hadn't they tried this before? There had to be something else, something that I was missing, or something that I didn't know. More than likely this had something to do with my uncle and all the things he has been doing. Regardless, we had been walking for quite some time now and there was no sign of anything or anyone that didn't belong here. I was about to tell Mark that we should head back when he suddenly stopped walking. "Damn, they're good," he said as he kneeled down and grabbed a handful of dirt in his gloved hand. To my surprise, he brought it up to his nose and inhaled deeply. I stopped to sniff the air, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I wondered if there truly was something that he could sense that I couldn't. Walking over to him, I noticed that his usually turquoise-colored eyes were somehow a deep greenish color and the look on his face had shifted from fear to something much darker. They are getting the help of a magic user to cover their tracks, and whoever it is knows how to keep their aura concealed, Mark said as he let the dirt fall from his hand. Too bad they had no idea that I specialize in concealment magic. I knew that Mark was Fae and that he has worked for my uncle for many years, but this was the first time that I heard anything about his magic put so plainly. Unsure if I was supposed to hear that, I dismissed his words and didn't react to his statement. Honestly, it seemed more like he was having a conversation with himself and had practically forgotten I was even there. Mark began muttering to himself again, but this time the words sounded less like words and more like sounds, or at least words in a language other than English. As I stood there watching him, I noticed that thin black wisps of smoke began coming up from the ground around where he was kneeling. I had never seen anything like that before. The smoke moved around Mark's feet and began spreading out in 2 different directions. The smoke thickened as it moved along the 2 paths, and I finally realized that Mark was making the smoke, or at the least controlling it somehow. Each path stretched far in opposite directions, and when I looked back at Mark, it wasn't just his eyes that had changed this time. His short black hair easily showed that his once rounded ears were now pointed at their peaks. Mark had always given off a sense of something different, of something other. Knowing that he was Fae explained it, but this was the first time that he didn't just feel Fae, he looked it. As obviously as I was gawking at him, Mark was completely oblivious to it. But as I watched him do, well, whatever it is that he was doing, I finally saw in him what others only whispered about. There were so many things about the Fae that I didn't know, but I had always heard that they possessed magic that was both similar and different to ours, but this was my first time seeing anything like it. Healing was one of the only things I had ever seen Mark do. I've watched him not only heal my wounds, but many others over the years. Harper linked me and he was about to ask me for an update, when I suddenly felt the booming voice of my uncle in my head. What the F***ck is going on in my Packlands? For a moment, the sudden appearance of his voice in my head filled me with so many different thoughts and emotions that I couldn't focus. If I could hear him, he had to be back on Packlands, and if that means he's back, that means that Dylan must be here as well. But, what if the person who left the message was still here? What if this person or people were actually here for her and not my uncle? Dane was trying to get my attention. Snap out of it, Aaron. If they are still here, then Dylan and her wolf may be in danger. **T, he was right. Now that my uncle was here, he wouldn't stop until he figured out who did this. Before I could link with him and let him know that I was with Mark and tell him whatever the hell it was that he was doing, Mark turned and finally looked at me. Mark locked eyes with me, and right before my eyes, his eyes began to lighten and go back to their usual turquoise color. As he stood, it seemed that he was struggling to stand, so I reached out to help him. Send a message to your uncle. Tell him to meet us here immediately, Mark demanded once he righted himself fully. Linking with my uncle, I briefly told him where I was and who I was with. I told him that Mark wanted him to meet us here. The growl my uncle let out from wherever he was seemed to resonate all around me, and I knew that when he joined us he would not be in human form. He would show up as his black beast that seemed like it had crawled up out of hell. It seemed like only a moment had passed before the sounds of wolves filled the woods around us, but only one burst forth into the area where Mark and I stood. Zane practically roared when he landed next to me, and Dane was practically roaring in my head. Shut up, I growled at him. I didn't have time for his **T right now. Mark spoke quickly. Whoever it was used the assistance of a Fae to cover their tracks. I countered their magic with my own, and there is a clear path leading from there. He pointed, through there. My uncle linked me. And where were you when someone was sneaking onto my Packlands? Of course, that is the first thing that he would want to know. There was no point in trying to make excuses. I knew better than anyone that he wouldn't care, so there was no point in wasting my breath. I am here to help find them, Alpha. What would you have me do? I asked as I bowed towards him. Zane growled, but I knew that he wouldn't do anything. My uncle never gave out punishments himself. I stood there staring at Zane, but my uncle linked. Follow the trail Mark found heading north, but you have to take him with you. Looking over to Mark, he didn't seem like he was able to stand for much longer, let alone go for a walk, so I asked, should I shift and have Dane carry him? He looks like he's about to pass out. Zane looked towards Mark and huffed out loud, fine, carry him as far as the border, but do not leave the Packlands. I shifted immediately and Dane walked over to Mark and laid down on his belly to let him get up on his back. As soon as Mark was on, he stood and we began to follow the path that he had created. It didn't take long to hit the border, but what surprised me is that we didn't come to the mountains, but the coast. When the path leads straight into the water, I linked with my uncle to give him the news. It had gone over just about as well as I had expected. He instructed me to meet him at his private office near the old barracks, and I knew that I was probably not going to be leaving there anytime soon. When I arrived, Mark was near the point of exhaustion, but the moment I opened the door the smell of blood hit me so hard that I almost dropped him off my back. I got Mark down and shifted so that we could walk the rest of the way down to the basement. The moment the door opened, I saw Noel strapped to one of the poles being whipped by another guard. My uncle was standing near the wall and I placed Mark in the chair near him. The whip sounded through the room like a crack, but Noel didn't even let out the slightest noise. I looked towards my uncle and he motioned with his chin towards the area next to Noel where another guard was already standing. Even if this wasn't the first time I've gone through this, it didn't mean that I was prepared for the pain I knew I was about to endure. I swallowed down the bile that was rising in my throat as I tried my best to prepare myself for this. When I looked back and saw Mark was now unconscious, I knew that whatever relief he may bring would not be coming anytime soon. Reaching the pole, the masked guard walked up to strap my hands. Dane reached out and began to repeat the same words over and over in my head. You are not alone, I am with you. As the first strike landed, I let out the breath that I had been holding. Dane continued to repeat the same words over and over as the blows kept coming. His words were the only things I focused on until everything went black. The marks on my skin had finally healed over enough that I could cover up the worst of them with the right clothes, so when Cruz called that he wanted to hang out, I was ready for the distraction. When I showed up to his house, I realized that not only was I going to hang out with him, but apparently Nico was going to come with us. The story that they told me was that we were walking Lesia somewhere before we went to eat. I still had no idea how I ended up standing here, on this porch, with the Demsilvera siblings, about to spend the evening with Dylan. Gods, I was going to make Cruz and Nico pay for this dearly. The moment that she opened the door I had no idea what to say or do. She looked absolutely beautiful. And in that moment, the only thing I could think of was how absolutely screwed I was. 28. Roanne. I have read through this report thrice now, and every time I read through it, I can feel the smile on my face getting wider and wider. Oh, how I wish I could have seen the look on his disgusting face the moment he arrived back to his lands and saw that stupid message. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing in the past few weeks has been able to sour my mood, but this was on a whole new level of bliss I haven't felt for, well, I don't know how long. From the moment that I learned what happened to my father, mother, and older brother, I began to plan and plot my revenge. My entire family had been killed and the only reason I was left alive was due to the fact that most people didn't know I even existed. When my parents were killed, it was made to look like a mere accident, and because we lived in the human world, there was no way that the police would have thought to look into supernatural causes. Growing up with my grandparents was hard, but I learned so much from them. They taught me not only about my father's legacy and the things that he did to help out society, but of my mother's heritage as well. From the outside, my mother looked like any normal human woman to those who only knew her as Mrs. Aspen, but she was also the eldest daughter and heir of the alpha from a large wolf pack. I was only 4 years old when I learned that the first few years of my life had been a beautiful lie that had been ripped away before I even had the chance to truly enjoy it. My uncles were running the pack that I now lived in, and they shared the role of alpha since my mother had refused to take the position when my grandfather had offered it to her. The loss of my family was hard on me, but the loss of my mother was almost fatal for my grandparents. Wolves do not suffer in the same way that humans do when it comes to loss and grief, and depression. Even at such an early age, I knew that the way my grandmother suffered was much worse than most. According to my grandfather, it was touch and go for a while, but he attributed her survival to me and her too much for the gods to deal with personality. Regardless, watching not only my grandmother overcome my mother's death only helped reinforce my resolve to find and destroy whoever had killed them. My uncles and grandfather began training me once I was fully recovered. Since they knew that I had taken after my mother, they had started to teach me how to unlock my wolf strength. Wolf packs are almost always run by a male alpha, but according to my grandparents and even my uncles, they said that my mom would have been the first female alpha of this pack. Even though my mom was determined to take on the role she was born into, she convinced my grandparents to let her attend college in the human world. According to my grandparents, my mother was a fireball who fought just as hard as she loved, and that is something that she did with her whole being. After all of these years, that was one of the things that I reminded myself every day not to forget. The faces of my parents, my brother, and the things that I missed most about them were some of the others. My uncles were both here meeting with me in the conference room, along with Xavier, Micah, and Tristan. This wasn't a true board meeting, but I was glad at how quickly they had all assembled when I called. Too bad that most of them were looking at me like I had just lost my mind. When my aide first brought in the message, I was clearly annoyed by the interruption, so I'm sure that my current disposition was making them curious. It's been a few weeks since everything happened and I honestly couldn't have planned it any better, but the results were almost exactly what I expected. Are you going to tell us what you are reading, or just keep us all sitting here looking like a bunch of jackass? Tristan mewed, clearly annoyed. Forcing myself from reading the report again, I placed the papers down in front of me on the enormous table. I was sitting at the head of the table and they were split up around me on both sides. Well, if you must know, and it seems like you must. This just so happens to be a report from what happened at Blood Mist Pack the day I put the first part of my plan in place. 5 sets of eyes looked at me with 5 completely different reactions. Annoyed, impressed, shocked, amused, and intrigued were what I was picking up from them, but I could be wrong. What are you talking about? Xavier asked first. I considered for a moment how much of my plan I wanted to share with him since I knew about his friendship with that F***er, but it didn't matter what he told him. Nothing was going to stop me. Even though Xavier had obviously poor taste in who he called friends, he was an exceptional worker and one of the most shrewd businessmen I knew. That, along with the fact that he had been faithful to my father and had no idea of who caused his death, are the only reasons I kept him around. The day that we had the visit from Rogan, I arranged for someone to sneak on his lands and leave a message, I said with all the confidence I felt in that moment. Xavier seemed to be trying to figure things out in that brilliant overworked head of his because his eyes kept moving side to side as if he was trying to work through the events of that day and how my words played into it. Well, look who finally grew some effing BLLS, Tristan bellowed as he threw himself back into his chair, laughing up the ceiling. Neither of my uncles said anything, but they were both linking me at the same time. And so it begins, nephew. My uncle Ezra hummed with his contentment with my words. Why would you act on your own without warning us first? My other uncle Blaine said with his obvious annoyance. I hated when they did that. Those bastards. They knew that I couldn't respond back to them, and if I did I would have to speak the words aloud. After all these years, I knew better than to lose my temper and snap at them. It wouldn't end well for anyone, but especially not for this room, so I inhaled deeply and tried to calm myself. No, I was too excited to let them piss me off this quickly. I've worked so hard to get things right where I need them. Working towards this goal is more important than my pride. Yes, well, since I was the one who came up with this plan, I didn't think that I needed anyone's permission to utilize my company or my men to accomplish the goals everyone else set for me. No one spoke for a moment and I used this time to refocus my mind and remember why I had called them all here to begin with. Looking towards Micah, he softly nodded his head and I knew that he was ready with the information I asked him to obtain. Putting the documents to the side, I cleared my throat. The reason I called you all here is because I had Micah working on a special project for me and he finally has the proof we have been looking for. Reaching out my hand towards Micah as if to say, the floor is all yours. He took his laptop out of a bag he had on the empty seat next to him and began clicking away on it. It took him about 2 minutes to dim the lights and pull up what was on his computer on a screen that dropped down out of the ceiling. F***ing show off, Tristan muttered with no hint of trying to go unheard. Micah didn't respond or even react to his words, he never did. No one would believe that the three of us are the best of friends by the way we all interact with each other, but we were. We had all grown up with a similar goal of taking down Rogan Blura, even if we had different reasons behind it. Micah's reasons for taking down Rogan were just as personal as mine, except the person he was fighting for was still alive, unlike Tristan and I. At times I resented him for that. But I had to remember that while I had to grieve my dead, he continually struggled with the fact that his loved one is still alive and unreachable to him. Not knowing what they are going through and how they are suffering every day is a different kind of pain. I had a feeling Tristan dealt with something similar but he'd never show it. The screen before us had images of wolves, along with different snips of writings from many different sources. Micah clicked away and the images shifted and changed from the original still picture to a slideshow. No one spoke as the information played out before the six of us, but I heard their reactions to the information being shared. While some of this I already knew, I hadn't seen all of it until now and a part of my mind was extremely pleased by the findings. Micah's slides kept going, but the last two were probably the most shocking to everyone and the second Micah clicked the keys and the lights turned back on. Tristan was up on his feet roaring at me. What the actual F***ck? How is this even possible? Are you telling me that you not only found her, you had the opportunity to meet her, and then you let him take her back to that F***ing hell? Tristan's eyes were so bright and his body shook so hard, that I could tell that he was doing everything he could to keep from shifting right here and attacking me. The look he was giving me was filled with so much emotion that I felt guilty for keeping this from him for so long, but I knew if he was aware he would have ended up ruining all my plans. Not only had I shown him that his sister was alive, but this information proved that before I knew it, we had had the opportunity to rescue her, but did nothing to keep him from taking her away again. We stayed there staring at each other for a few more moments and I could see the hurt, fear, and betrayal playing over his features. It killed me to know what kind of pain I was causing him, but if he let me, I would make this up to him. Finally, he unclenched his fists, turned, and began to walk towards the door, but he hadn't moved fast enough that I couldn't help see the tears filling his eyes. I wanted to go to him and beg for his forgiveness, but everyone in this room and out of it needed to know that I ruled here. Before he walked out the door, he spoke, but didn't turn to look at me as he said, if anything happens to her before I get her back, remember that it's your fault because you chose revenge over her life. The stabbing pressure I felt in my chest throbbed with his words because no matter how much I tried to justify my plans, he was essentially right and nothing I told him or myself changed the truth of his words. As the door closed, I knew that something in our relationship had forever been changed in that moment. Even if I told him everything about my interaction with her and the fact that I didn't know it was her until after she was gone wouldn't change anything. Xavier was the first of those still in the room to speak. Are you telling me that Dylan Solemeyer, the girl who has worked in the transcription department for the past few years, is Tristan's sister? Neither my uncles or Micah answered his question because he was looking directly at me. Yes, after Dylan left the campus I had someone give her water bottle to Micah for further testing. I was suspicious of her when we first met both because of her looks and the way I couldn't help but react to her, I explained. Everyone was looking towards me because they knew that I couldn't access my wolf like others, but had extra senses because of him and the fact that he had sensed something about her was not to be taken lightly. Micah closed everything up and stood to leave. I will go and talk to Tristan. He needs to know what happened and how we found her. Even though I knew he was right, I wished I could go with him. Tristan deserved more than this, but my plans were just unfolding and I needed to explain to my uncles what we would do next. The distance between Tristan, Micah, and myself had grown lately, but I felt like this had made things so much worse than I could have ever imagined. Once Micah was gone, my uncle Ezra asked, now that you've pissed off your friends, please let me know how you pissed off Rogan. Xavier looked nervous and I wasn't sure if it was too much for him to be here with the three of us knowing we were wolves or if all of this information was just too much for him to take in at once. I've had one of my sentinels sneaking in and out of the Packlands as a test, and while they were here I had him sneak onto his lands and leave a message in blood on the side of a building. They all continued to look at me until Ezra finally said, and exactly what did your little message say, nephew? Regardless of what was going on, I couldn't keep the smile off my face when I told them. The reign of the usurper is near its end and the true heir will soon reign again. 29. Dylan. Everything had started out fine this morning and I even got to walk to school with Cruz. He happened to show up outside my house right when I was leaving. Supposedly it was due to the fact that he had just gotten off of some kind of patrol training, but regardless the reason, I didn't mind the company. For the past few weeks there hasn't been a day where at least one of the Silveras haven't been with me. It was an odd feeling to have people around who seemed to genuinely care for me. Soaking it all in was therapeutic and I even imagined all these new memories hopefully replacing some of the ones I wish so desperately to erase. Every day with all of them was beginning to slowly fill up the emptiness that existed in me little by little. Even the interactions I've had with others besides those three have even seemed so much nicer. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, these people were starting to see me as something other than just the daughter of some lowly traders hardly worth remembering. One particular person had really thrown me for a loop, especially since after the night he had shown up with the others I haven't seen or heard any sign of him even at school. I wanted to ask Cruz about it since he seemed closest to him, but I didn't want him to get the wrong idea. So, I tamped down the lid on my curiosity. Being alone with him now made that extra hard. That night had started off a little awkwardly because it seemed that even though he was there, Aaron looked as if he wished to be anywhere else. Unsure how I was supposed to act, I was at a loss as well since our previous interactions had either been him bullying me, him seeing Ray, or him being with Alpha Rogan. I wanted to ask him why he had helped me that night, but I honestly didn't know how to approach him. The fact that he seemed so uncomfortable that night didn't help with my confusion either. Lesia and I had stayed up one night after that on the phone talking about that entire night's events. She decided that we needed to dissect the whole evening and provide additional commentary on certain areas. Besides the in-depth recap, she also felt that I needed Aaron's backstory and the origin story of how he became friends with her brothers. Learning that he had lost both of his parents softened my heart a bit, but it hadn't made me forgive all the things he'd done to me. As I walked in pleasant silence with Cruz, those were just some of the things going through my mind. I guess I had been really distracted because I hadn't heard him talking until he reached out and tapped my arm. Earth to Dylan, "Are you okay?" he asked sweetly with so much concern in both his voice and his eyes that I couldn't help but feel a bit bad for ignoring him. Yes. I mean, I'm sorry, I stumbled on the words. I didn't mean to ignore you, I was just a little lost in thought. Honestly, I wasn't really used to walking around with anyone, so I only ever talked with Ray or to myself if I was being honest. The smile that played across his softly tanned face made him look so, well, handsome that I had to take a small step back. It didn't matter that he was younger than me, he was at least half a foot taller than me. Maybe it was my reaction, but I could have sworn that the broad smile that spread across his lips had a hint of something other than just kindness behind it. "Don't apologize," he said as he moved his hand around smoothly and hooked our arms together. "When you're a twin you forget how to be around regular people who don't speak your language." Regular people? Speak your language? What did he mean by that? Ray laughed in my head and said, "He jests, little one. Twins are special. They are blessed with a soul who matches theirs in every way, shape, and form. They are blessed by the gods." Wow, I had no idea that twins were just, wow. I looked at our linked arms and then up at his face, and even though he didn't look at me, he smiled and said, "Did your wolf tell you about twins?" Shock ran through me and I stopped walking immediately. Had he heard us? No, there's no way. I couldn't figure it out and I'm sure I looked as confused as I felt, but thank goodness he had pity on me. Laughing, he squeezed my arm a little and rubbed his other hand across my hand. "Don't worry, I didn't hear you. I had a feeling you were linking with your wolf and that she was explaining the stories of twins to you. This has probably been the most exciting walk to school I've ever taken and I was so glad that he decided to walk with me." Squeezing his hand back the way he had done mine, I smiled at him and said, "You and Nico need to show me your twin tricks next time." The laugh he let out was so thick and warm and genuine that I couldn't help but laugh myself. Even Ray seemed to be laughing with us. Our walk seemed to come to an end too soon because the second that we turned down the street the school was on I heard people whispering and murmuring. Whatever joy had filled me was slowly seeping away as those old feelings began to penetrate the little bubble we were in. I tried to pull my arm out of his but he clasped me even tighter. "FCK them," he said loudly. "Don't let any of these a-holes make you feel bad about being here, Dylan. Jealousy looks ugly in any form." He was right. Even though I didn't feel like being strong, I knew better than to show weakness to anyone here. Gripping his arm just as hard as he gripped mine, I smiled as we walked into the schoolyard and before I knew it, Lesia was running over towards us. "Cruz, why are you manhandling my friend?" she chirped as she got closer to us and tried to pull me away from him. "Did you do anything else to her?" she asked him while looking at me. Before I could tell her that nothing happened and that he was just walking me to school, she continued to get after him. "Is this why you took that patrol this morning? So that you could make your move on my bestie?" Cruz was slowly removing his arm from mine, and when I looked at him, I saw that his cheeks were pinker than they had been on the walk over. "Lesia, don't be mean. He went out of his way to walk me here and I think it was really sweet of him," I said as she has finally pulled us apart. "It's one of the best walks I've been on." She had replaced his arm with hers and was pulling me into the building when she huffed, "Don't say things like that. You're going to give him a bigger head than he already has." Lesia and I had one morning class together and then we went our separate ways until lunch. It was funny how much better I had been doing in my classes now that I was, well, happier. Hell, even the food in the school cafeteria seemed to taste better with my upbeat demeanor. Walking down the halls was easier and I dreaded it far less than when I was constantly bullied, but I should have expected something to happen today. As I walked into the cafeteria, I walked past a table full of Aaron's friends, and to my surprise, he was sitting in the middle of the group. When I walked past, we locked eyes for a moment, and I wasn't 100% sure what it was, but something looked wrong with him. The coloring of his skin and the circles under his eyes made him look sick or maybe hurt. But as quickly as he had looked at me, he looked away and whispered something to the girl to his right. I wasn't sure what he said, but she laughed loudly and looked right at me with a sneer on her face, and she leaned in to say something to the rest of their group. Wanting to get away from them before something happened, I quickened my pace, but apparently I wasn't fast enough. Before I knew it, something wet and mushy hit me in the back of the head. Whatever it was felt slimy and warm as it slipped down my hair and fell both on my back and the floor behind me. The laughter that erupted from the whole cafeteria was deafening and I didn't know what I should do. I knew someone from Aaron's little group had been behind this, but I didn't have it in me to turn and face them. Ray was livid. Do not let them bring you down, little one. Keep your head up and keep walking. Easier said than done. I didn't even want to look down to see what they had thrown at me, but when I looked around at the table next to me, I saw that there was some kind of pasta on the plates around me. Gods, had they actually thrown a plate of spaghetti at me? Standing there, I looked around to see if Lesia was here. I saw her on the opposite side of the room walking into the back doors. The moment we locked eyes, I saw the hurt, rage, and fear play across her face. She started to rush towards me and her lips were moving like she was trying to say something, but the noise in the cafeteria was too loud to make it out. I started to walk towards her when someone pulled my arm and twisted me to the side. Whoever it was didn't even give me a moment before they smacked me in the face with another plate of food. This time it went everywhere, including all over my face. I could barely see, but I heard her words carefully. Oops, my bad. I thought they said to throw it at the trash. Don't be mad, at least it matches your hair. The voice laughed much too loudly. If I thought it was loud before, I was mistaken. The cafeteria was so loud, I could barely hear Ray inside my own head. Stay calm, precious girl, don't lose yourself. Easier said than done. My emotions and thoughts were all over the place and I had no idea what to do. This was the first time that anyone had done something on this scale or in front of so many people. Lesia finally reached me, and she was simultaneously wiping my face as she whispered in my ear, "It's okay, Dylan, I'm here, I've got you." I knew this wasn't okay, but I did feel a bit better from her embrace. I felt her leading me slowly towards the door as we both continued to wipe away the pasta and sauce from my face and hair. Voices I knew rose above the rest and we had cleared enough of the mess from blocking my vision to see around me now. Nico was right beside us and had a handful of napkins that he was desperately trying to use to wipe the sauce off my hair. It wasn't Nico that I was watching though, it was Cruz, who was on the other side of the cafeteria running straight at Aaron was seemed to be standing there just waiting to be tackled. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to join him. I wanted him to hurt Aaron the way that his friends had just hurt me. But when I looked at Aaron right before Cruz's fist collided with his face, he turned and mouthed something in my direction and I could have sworn he had mouthed, "I'm sorry." The moment that Cruz and Aaron went down to the ground, Lesia used the sudden rush of the crowd moving towards them to get me out the doors and rushed me towards the bathroom. To my surprise, Nico came in with us, but they were both talking to each other and me at the same time and I couldn't focus on either of them. What the F***ck happened? Who did this? Why would someone do this to her? Should we take her home? Ray was just as loud in my head as they were. Dylan, you need to get away from here. We need to go home, now. As Lesia and Nico cleaned and wiped my hair and back they continued to talk really, at each other, but I wasn't sure if they noticed that they had stood me right in front of the mirror. My eyes looked wild even to me, and the girl's words from a moment ago popped in my mind. She was right, the sauce matched well with my hair, and the longer I looked at it, I only agreed more. The laugh that crept out of my throat sounded eerie, and drew Lesia and Nico's attention immediately. Dylan, I think Nico's right, we should take you home. There's no reason for you to stay here. I knew she was right. I knew they were all right, but I couldn't stop looking at the mirror. Looking at what they did to me, at what he did to me. My mind kept bringing up images of Aaron at my house, on my couch, laughing with the four of us while we hung out, and then to the way he looked moments ago. Ray's anger had no words and neither did mine. I felt myself slip in and out of so many different emotions. I was angry at myself for thinking things had truly started to change, hurt that he had tricked me, ashamed that I had wanted him to be different, and pissed that I had let my guard down. There was no way in hell that I would let any of them get away with this, and before I could stop myself, I ran for the door to make sure that I wouldn't hurt Lesia and Nico as I shifted. Ray burst through the door and she let out an unearthly growl that filled me with a sick pleasure because I knew that Alpha Rogan would probably kill me for this, but right now I didn't care. 30. Aaron. Happiness was a feeling that I haven't experienced in some time, much longer than I would like to admit. But as I said goodnight to the twins, I was finally able to put a name to that tightness in my face from smiling so much. Dane had been quiet and hadn't said much since we first arrived at Dylan's house. I had muttered to him that we were going to kick Cruz's sometime soon and he needed to remind me so that I wouldn't forget. I should have known that he was up to something when he insisted that I accompany him and Nico to run an errand, but I didn't think that he would do something that sneaky. Ever since that day he had made it a point to needlessly tell me details of Dylan's life that he heard about from Lesia. Nico and him had started spending a lot of time with her, and I knew that he enjoyed retelling the stories of the things they did, ate, or even talked about. I knew why he did it. My dumma had made him suspicious about how I felt about her. Even though I never came out and said anything, it was hard to deny that I cared for her even though I wasn't supposed to. Regardless of their age, the twins were oddly mature and seemed to exist in their own little bubble, but somehow they had invited me to join them, so they knew me better than most. Too bad, even though they were pretty cool most of the time, they could still act like D***CKs when the occasion called for it. When I had realized that we were heading towards Dylan's house, I tried to throw out excuses as to why I had to go and do something else, anything else, but Cruz was relentless. What are you talking about? He asked so innocently. You said that we were going to hang out for the whole evening, right, Nico? Nico wasn't any better. Yep. He said that he missed us so much that he cleared his whole schedule just to be with us. Even if I wasn't sure if Cruz had shared his suspicions about how I felt with Nico, I hoped that Lesia was oblivious to it. Don't feel bad about crashing our evening. I already told Dylan that you would be coming with us and she was cool with it, she said sweetly. She turned to smile at me as we approached the door, and I had to admit that I was so glad that Dylan had someone like her in her life. I still wasn't sure why he had let that happen, but I was still glad for it. Lesia knocked, and I heard Dylan's soft voice say something, but when she didn't answer the door, Lesia just grabbed the handle and swung the door open. Dylan was standing there and Dane purred in my head. Gods, I had to shut my mouth so hard to keep hold of myself and hold back from making that exact sound. She looked beautiful in her fitted jeans and a white top that made the color of her hair stand out even though she had it up in the sexiest way. F***CK. She looked really hot and I had to force myself to think of something other than that because I could feel a bulge in the front of my pants, and this definitely was not the time for this. When our eyes met she smiled, but it looked a little forced and I could sense that she seemed a bit nervous. That helped soothe my building erection, but I had to admit that it hurt. I don't know what I was thinking. Just because the last few interactions that we had were better than most, it didn't erase all the times I treated her like sh**t. Whatever reservations that she may have had though, she welcomed us all inside. The little space looked exactly the way it had last time, but I noticed that she now had 4 chairs at her little table instead of 2. Apparently Lesia and the twins were going there to cook with her and have a game night of some sorts. I realized then that Lesia had a large bag with her, and to my surprise it was full of all kinds of ingredients. Lesia and Dylan headed to the kitchen, and with the half wall being the only thing separating them from the living area, we could see and hear everything from where we sat on the couch. Glad you came with us? Cruz asked softly as he nudged me with his elbow. I was, but I was not about to admit it to him. I was still annoyed that he had lied to me. Glancing over at him, I jabbed him with my elbow like he had, just much harder. Nico laughed at the noise that came out of Cruz's mouth, and I had to admit I enjoyed it as well, and now the 3 of us were smacking the crap out of each other like the grown men we were. Watching Lesia unpack all the things that were in that bag was impressive. My mom said that she is really sorry that we keep coming and eating all of your food, so she sent a bunch today, she told Dylan. The laugh that came out of Dylan made me stop short of the slap I was about to give to the back of Nico's head. I stared at them in the kitchen, and all I wanted in that moment was for her to make that sound again. Gods, had I ever heard such a beautiful sound. Cruz seized the opportunity and got me good right in the chest. Leaning forward and trying to catch my breath, I heard Lesia yell, "Can you 3 idiots cut your crap already? I swear, if you can't behave I'm gonna make you leave with no food." The twins sat up straight like obedient little puppies and responded to her in perfect unison. Yes ma'am. Gods, is that all it took to make these idiots behave? I laughed myself as I slowly sat back up and I locked eyes with Dylan again. This time her smile came a bit easier and I felt my heart begin to race. Too bad the second that she turned away and her and Lesia started doing whatever it was they were doing in there, the twins decided to team up and both smacked me in the back of the head. Holes, I hissed as I got up, rubbing the back of my head with my hand. Deciding that I would help them in the kitchen, I walked over and offered my services. Would you ladies like any help in here? I offered shyly. Dylan had her back to me because she was grabbing some pans from a little cabinet, but Lesia immediately accepted. Yes, that would be great, she chirped happily as she pointed to the sink. Go ahead and wash up and I'll have you start chopping the vegetables. When I went to the area Lesia had set up for me, she told me to roll my sleeves up like hers so that I didn't get dirty. I was so distracted that I hadn't realized that I shouldn't have done that. As soon as I had, Lesia let out a soft shriek. Gods, Aaron, what on earth happened to you? When I looked up at her I noticed that Dylan was right next to her and they were both staring at my arms in a mixture of shock and horror. Too late to hide them, I made up an excuse that seemed somewhat believable. Oh, these are from all the sparring matches that I've had over the years. The looks that they gave me were tinged with both horror and pity and I couldn't bear it, so I forced out a loud laugh and changed the subject. Cooking has never been my strong suit, so don't blame me if I accidentally burn anything. The twins popped up and were now standing on the other side of the little wall leaning over to watch what was going on. Crisis averted and subject changed, I asked for instructions on what they wanted me to do. It turns out that they were making some kind of stir-fry and they didn't really need much help because apparently they were both really good cooks. I, on the other hand, could barely chop the carrots. In the amount of time it took me to peel and chop one, Dylan had chopped all of the cabbage, mushrooms, and onions. Her standing so close to me didn't help and I couldn't keep myself from getting distracted as I watched the way that she handled the knife. What the f***ck was wrong with me? Who gets turned on watching a chick wield a knife? Me apparently. Finally done with my carrot, Lesia made me and the twins set the table. Realizing that there was only 4 chairs, Dylan asked, "Are one of you okay with sitting on my desk chair?" This time the 3 of us responded all together, "I will." Immediately, the twins both ran to get the chair that was tucked neatly under her desk and then ended up rolling around like toddlers on the floor. Once Lesia had smacked her giant-sized toddler brothers, she made them finish with the table and we all sat down to eat. The food was amazing and even though we were supposed to have a game night, we never got around to it. Too soon, it seemed that midnight had rolled around and we all stayed to help clean and keep the conversation going. Unfortunately, Lesia, who was spending the night, forced us to eventually leave. It was on my way back to the pack house that I was met by one of my uncle's guards. They led me to that building, and I knew that things were about to suck. My aunt was sitting on the couch in the basement and asked me to join him. "I heard that you visited Dylan's house tonight," he said flatly but not softly. I wasn't surprised that he knew, but I was a little impressed that he had found out this quickly. There was no point in denying it so I didn't say anything. "Have you forgotten the instructions I gave you, boy?" he growled. Of course I haven't forgotten. How could I when he constantly reminded me of them? Knowing that nothing I said would make this better for me, I responded, "I thought that maybe you had changed your mind since you let her have a friend finally." That was the wrong thing to say, because he swung out so fast that I had no time to react. His fist hit me so hard in the face that I heard the crunch of my nose before I felt it. "Who told you to think, boy?" he asked as he wiped the blood from his knuckles on my jeans. Looking down I saw that blood was dripping onto my shirt. "Just because I let that girl get close to Dylan, doesn't mean that you are to let others do the same," he snarled. Out of all the times that I've been here and all the times that I've been punished, this was the first time that he had ever hit me himself. Unsure of what was going to happen next, I sat there and just let the blood run from my broken nose. I wasn't prepared for this, for him being in such a mood that he would be the one to do the punishing, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. One of the unnamed guards grabbed me and sat me in a chair that had cuffs on the armrests and on the legs. The blood from my nose had slowed to a stop already, but the fear of what might happen was making my heart race. My uncle walked over to a table and I watched as he took out a pouch full of all kinds of weird tools and devices. One of the things he took out was a small torch that he tested the length of the flame when he switched it on. Walking over towards me, he held the lit torch in his hand. When your alpha gives you orders, you follow them, especially if he is your uncle who has taken you in and raised you. My eyes watched him bring the torch down towards my wrist and hold it against the metal cuff. It took a few seconds to start getting warm, but before long it was burning the skin off my hand as I tried to pull my arm out. "Oh Aaron, it's about time that you see what happens when I'm truly upset," he said as he kneeled down and brought the torch towards the leg of the chair. I wasn't sure how much time had passed while I had been in that room. The types of things that my uncle did to me, or instructed others to do to me had taken quite a bit of time and my body had not even fully healed yet. A few hours ago he had come in to heal what he could, but my body felt like it was on the verge of death. I couldn't even talk to Dane because of the amount of drugs they had injected in me. When Mark had done all that he could, my uncle walked into the makeshift clinic in a clean suit and smelling of sandalwood and mint. I wanted to puke just looking at him. "I hope this has taught you to follow orders from now on, Aaron. If you can no longer deal with Dylan, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to get someone else to help me with this," he said sounding sad. My mind was all over the place and I couldn't tell if he was finally going to let me out of here, but I was also afraid that he would do just as he said and get someone else to hurt Dylan. Some part of me was convinced that he knew that I had feelings for her and that is why he was making me do this to her, but I wasn't sure. Noel came in the room and I knew that I must look like shit by the way his skin paled as he approached. "Get him showered and dressed, he needs to get to school," my uncle ordered him. Noel came over and practically carried me from the room and out of the building. When we had finally reached the barracks, Noel took me straight to the showers and helped me get undressed. I thought he had finally killed Ya Boy, he had Ya in there for a whole week, he whispered. The clothes he helped me out of were filthy. There was blood and burn marks all over them and I could hardly look at them as he scooped them up and took them to the trash. As the hot water hit me, I let the tears that I had refused to shed finally fall, but I knew Noel saw them. Since there was nothing he could do about it, he helped me wash the wounds Mark couldn't heal. I knew that I had to do something to Dylan today or else my uncle would do just as he said and I knew that if someone else was put in charge of keeping her secluded, they would do much worse than I ever had. All the idiots that followed me around school were useful tools in the fact that they would do anything I said or even hinted at. It killed me to think of hurting her after the night at her house, but this was for her safety. I got to school right before lunch and the crowd was already around me when I finally hobbled to my table. When she walked in and our eyes met, I thought that she looked concerned or worried for a moment, but I pushed it away. It hadn't taken much to mention to one of the girls how much the sauce on the pasta looked like Dylan's hair for her to get the idea to go and dump it on her. Watching it play out killed me, and I had started to feel Dane coming out of the drug-induced fog. I could feel his anger at my actions, but he knew as well as I did that this had to be done. No matter how much I prepared myself for it, seeing Dylan's reaction killed me. I wished I could run to her and clean it off. I wish that she never had to deal with things like this, or people like me. When another girl walked up and threw the other plate at her, I swear my heart broke and when Cruz ran towards me and grabbed me out of the chair I didn't even try to fight him. I wanted him to make me hurt as much, no more than Dylan was hurt in that moment. Each blow felt good. I deserved everything he did and said. Somehow he had gotten me out of the chaos of the cafeteria and had slammed me up against the wall in the hallway. I was bleeding again, but not just from him. My cuts had opened up, I could feel the scabs tearing. As he stood there looking at me, I could see the confusion on his face, but the anger was winning out and he kept punching me. I can't believe you let those a-holes do that to her, he yelled at me. I couldn't tell him. For one, he probably wouldn't believe me, but it would be worse if he did, so I just kept silent. Teachers were in the cafeteria trying to break up a food fight, so when a door blew open a little further down the hall, no one came running. Cruz and I were close enough to hear it, so we both turned to see a massive red wolf leap into the hallway. What the F***ck, Cruz yelled as we both stared at who I was positive was Dylan's wolf. No, there was no way that she would disobey him and let no just a few, but all of them see her wolf. Dane was going crazy. He wanted me to shift, to go to her, to bow down and ask for forgiveness, but my mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. I couldn't fathom how she would think that this was a good idea, and I was raking my brain to figure out what to do now. Lesia and Nico ran into the hall behind Dylan's wolf, and while one of them looked impressed, the other looked shocked. If it would have been any other time, I would have pointed out to Cruz that him and his brother were making the exact same expression, but there was no time for that. Knowing that there was no way that Dylan's wolf would listen to me, she probably wanted to kill me right now. I knew that I had to get the Silveras to help me. I grabbed the collar of Cruz's shirt and pulled him closer towards me. It took a second because he was focused on the snarling red wolf that was stalking towards us. Cruz, that is Dylan's wolf and you need to get her to shift and get out of here before anyone sees her. I yelled at him as best as I could with my broken and bleeding lip. What? He asked while he looked back and forth between me and the massive wolf. Gods, she was magnificent and I couldn't blame him for gawking, but right now he was my only hope of getting her out of this. Shaking him roughly, I yelled at him, listen to me, damn it, you need to get her out of here before anyone sees her. If they do, he won't let this go. Thankfully the desperation in my voice must have pulled him out of his stupor because he looked at me as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle. Dane still wasn't himself and I couldn't link with Cruz to try to explain things better, but as he stared at me I saw his expression shift from confusion to understanding. Cruz muttered as he looked me up and down from head to toe and I saw him see me, and put it all together. You're trying to protect her from something, he whispered, or should I say, someone. I couldn't meet his eyes, but I knew that it was enough to make him realize what was going on. He leaned in close to my ear and whispered, when this is over, you are going to tell me everything, he demanded before letting me go. He ran over to Dylan's large wolf with his hands raised and said, hello ma'am, I don't know if you know who I am, but I really need you to shift back to Dylan before anyone sees you, he begged. Dylan's wolf looked at him, and then at me and snarled. Gods, I wish she would just come and kill me, I deserved it. But Cruz must have linked with Lesia because she ran up next to the wolf and kneeled down. When the wolf looked at her, Lesia spoke softly to her, but I heard every word. Ray, she said, you must shift back and let us help Dylan get home. If the Alpha finds out that anyone saw you today, he will punish her. Do you understand? The wolf, Ray, swung her head towards Lesia, then back at me. For a moment our eyes met and she cocked her head to the side as if she was trying to see through me. I stared back at her wishing that I could link with her or let her see inside my head, but she looked back towards Lesia and nodded at her. In a flash, Ray was gone and the last thing I saw before passing out, was Dylan being scooped up off the floor by Cruz who carried her out the side door followed by Nico and Lesia.